Hi, I'm Keith Jacobus, the Superintendent of the South Washington County School District. Today we'd like to provide you more information on our question 3 that will be part of our referendum question on the ballot on November 5th. Question 3 asks our voters to approve $8 million to purchase land for future facility needs. Our district has experienced steady growth over the last few years, and we anticipate growth well into the future. As our enrollment has accelerated and some changes have taken place in the legislature for us to be able to offer full-day kindergarten to all our kids, along with our expanded preschool offerings, we know that we will have additional space needs in the near future. In reviewing our needs, we believe that we need 80 acres to look at a site that would accommodate an elementary school and a middle school, or 2 separate sites that would accommodate an elementary school and a middle school. Here with me now is Mike Vogel, our assistant to the superintendent for operations. And Mike does our planning and looks ahead on our future facility needs. And I've asked him to join me to explain more in depth a few things about the levy. Thanks, Mike, for being here.
Thank you, Superintendent Jacobus. My pleasure.
My first question is about 80 acres. Why we need 80 acres and how we might use that land.
Well, Keith, as you know, we are approaching capacity in all 4 of our middle schools. And so one of the objectives we have is to look for some land for a future middle school site. We also know that with the increase in residential development that's going to be occurring in the cities of Cottage Grove and Woodbury, that we're likely to need an elementary school to accommodate that growth in residential housing. So we look to the Minnesota Department of Education, which puts out a guideline for school construction, and it has guidelines for how much land do you need for different types of school buildings. For elementary buildings, they recommend that you have 10 to 15 acres of land, plus an additional acre for each 100 students. So our typical elementary building is designed to house about 700 students. So based on those MDE guidelines, we think we would need somewhere between 17 and 22 usable acres of land. For a middle school site, they recommend that you have 25 to 35 usable acres, again, plus an additional acre for each 100 students. So if we're going to plan for a 1,200 student middle school, we would need somewhere between 37 and 47 acres of land. And when we talk about the amount of land that's required for school buildings, they use the term usable land. And in order to get 25 to 35 acres of usable land, you have to first subtract out any wetlands that might be on the property. You have to account for setbacks. You have to account for city-required ponding for runoff water. So in order for us to get 25 to 35 usable acres, we might have to have an additional 5 acres for some of those other purposes. So when we look at a combined site, we're looking at roughly 30 acres for an elementary and roughly 50 acres for a middle school. Total number of acreage then comes to 80 acres. And in our perfect world, that might be a combined site for both buildings. If not, it might be 2 separate sites, a separate 30-acre site for the elementary and 50-acre site for the middle school.
Mike, can you also tell us about other factors that go into the selection of a site?
Sure. First and foremost, we have to consider cost as always a primary consideration. We have to live with the budget that has been established. In this case, if the voters approve $8 million, that's the maximum amount of money that we would have available to acquire land. Secondly, we want to have a willing seller. We want to deal with folks who are actively marketing their property for sale and are willing to sell for school district issues. We also have to consider what the city zoning or school site criteria are. They will typically require that the land be located inside what's called the metropolitan urban service area, and it maybe is inside the urban service area or adjacent to it so that we can connect up to city sewer and city water. We consider the topography of the land. Is it suitable for school activities? We also want to look at any potential environmental concerns, which usually has to do with prior uses of the land that might create some hidden conditions that we're unaware of. So we would typically have an environmental assessment done on the land before we would agree to purchase it. And then finally, we look at what's the proximity of the land to our proposed and current student populations.
And where are we as far as our current capacities in our buildings, and when do you anticipate we would be looking at the next building coming online?
Okay. Well, at our middle schools, we're approaching capacity in all 4 of our middle schools. Cottage Grove Middle School's population is about 1,180 students now, with a capacity of around 1,300 to 1,320 kids. Lake Middle School is a little bit, few more kids than Cottage Grove. It has a little over 1,200 kids now with the same capacity. Oatman Middle School is a smaller middle school. It has a capacity of about 820 kids, and we're at about 710 kids currently. And Woodbury Middle School, which has a capacity of around 1,000 kids, has a current population of about 930 students. So you'll see that all of those middle schools have room for somewhere close to 100 kids, maybe a little more than that. We're not at our capacity, and our middle school growth has been about 170 kids over the last 3 years. So we're looking at roughly 60 kids a year growth. We think that probably will happen a little more rapidly as new areas of housing go online. So we probably have a couple of years anyways worth of space in our middle schools. And we're kind of targeting 2015 as a timeline to go to the community for a potential bond referendum for future buildings. At the elementary level, we have kind of pressing issues at 2 buildings right now. Liberty Ridge Elementary has got 970 students in it, and with the addition of Liberty Ridge Site 2, we're right about at our capacity for that building right now. Middleton Elementary will have 800 students this year, and that capacity is somewhere in the 800 to 850 student range. So we're bumping up against the capacity in those 2 buildings. We have room in several of our other elementary buildings, but they're really not located in an area that's convenient to where the growth in the community is occurring. So again, as we look at the residential development that's slotted to continue in Cottage Grove and Woodbury, the expectation is in 2015 that if we have a bond referendum, it likely would include money for an elementary school as well.
And what would the question 3, if this was passed, what's the impact on homeowners as far as their tax bill?
Well, I think on what we kind of use as a guide is a $250,000 home, and the impact of the land acquisition itself, $8 million, translates to about $1 a month for a $250,000 home, or $12 a year.
Right. And I should remind folks that if you go to our website, there's a calculator that you can put your cost of your home in, and for all of our questions, including question number 3, our land question, you can calculate what the impact will be for you as a homeowner. So Mike, how will the district move forward with the planning and getting ready for our long-term and short-term needs for facilities?
Well, I think, again, waiting, we want to know the outcome of the referendum, and then our goal will be to put together a long-range planning committee that will look at what our future requirements for buildings are going to be. I think that our objective, again, will be to look towards 2015 as a timeline for a future bond referendum, and with the idea that it will probably take 24 to 30 months to bring a building online following approval of a referendum. So we would likely be targeting 2017 for any possible openings of a future building.
Great. Mike, I know we've had questions from people about where will the land be. Can you explain a little bit about where you see our growth and the projections and how we are looking at the ability to identify the plot of land that we might be interested in?
Sure. You mentioned earlier, Keith, that each of the cities that we deal with has a comprehensive plan. And within those comprehensive plans, the cities lay out the residential development projections that they have for the future. And both of our cities of Cottage Grove and Woodbury have pretty significant areas of future growth that they've identified and opened up for residential development. Starting with Cottage Grove, they have currently land in what's called the East Ravine development area, and that's, for the most part, it's from the Woodbury border south to 70th Street, and then extends from Jamaica to County Road 19 or Keats Avenue, and then continues to the south. But within that area, they currently have 4 developments that are either approved by the city or going through the approval process, and they contain about 360 residential homes in those 4 developments. In the city of Woodbury, they have the area both south and east of East Ridge High School that has been opened up for future development. The first phase of that contains about 600 acres of land and will allow for about 1,800 residential units. They too have about 4 developments that have been either approved or are going through the approval process, and those will bring about 800 additional home sites to that area. So the bulk of our growth is occurring in the areas where Woodbury and Cottage Grove kind of merge together on the southern border of Woodbury and the northern border of Cottage Grove. So that's a natural place for us to look for land that's available. So we've identified a number of sites. I have maybe 9 sites that we've looked at that both the cities and the school district think might be suitable locations for a school. And at this point, what we'll start to do is to work with landowners to determine, again, if they are willing sellers. We'll look to see what it is that they're looking for their property, and we'll try to narrow the field down a little bit before we get involved in doing environmental studies and appraisals of the property, just because of the expense associated with trying to evaluate numerous sites.
And there's a need for some confidential negotiations to make sure that things can be done appropriately and also to receive the best value for our taxpayers.
Correct. Yeah, the school board has the ability to negotiate behind closed doors for land acquisitions. And so we'll bring information to the school board relative to the various sites and what we see as the pros and cons associated with each one. And then before we make any offers to landowners, they'll have to be approved by the school board in advance.
Sure. And so it's important then not to identify the land early because of the negotiation process and to ensure that we can receive the best value and price for our taxpayers. And so there have been questions, why have we not said this is where the purchase of the land would be? Well, we have a lot of processes to go through, and it's not meant to be a top secret process, so to speak, but it's meant to be done in a respectful way for the landowners and for you as taxpayers to, again, receive the best value for the land that we purchase. Well, thank you for tuning in today, and I hope you will go to our website if you have further questions. We do have a place where you can submit questions that we will answer on the website. Also, we have a number of what we're calling parent universities. We started these last year. They're really meant to talk about what is happening in the classroom and instruction, but this fall we're using the time to help people to understand a little bit more about the levy. At those meetings, we have time to discuss and to talk more in depth on all 3 of our questions. So thanks again for the support you have shown to the South Washington County School District, and I appreciate your interest in our levy this fall.